Welcome to Design to Move, a weekly functional movement series reviewing common movement impairment syndromes, muscle imbalances, and injury cycles and how to correct for them. Don't just exercise, but restore optimal movement. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Design to Move. My name is Ryan Maxwell. This is Hunter Schweitz. We're both movement specialists here at Fluid Health and Fitness. Today we're going to go over a common movement distortion pattern called lower cross imbalance. This impacts a lot of the population. It's because we all have tight hip flexors and lower back muscles around our lumbar spine. So today we're going to show you how to reduce some of the overused muscles in the body, activate the underactive or deficient muscle groups, and show you how to apply it into everyday functional movements. If you have questions on the topic, make sure to reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com, or you can read our blog on the topic. It's listed in the description below. We go into more detail there. We do have a table of contents to the side, so if you want to skip to any one of these segments, go ahead and feel free to do so. And at the very end, we have a condensed version of the entire video, so you can go just through the acute variable selections and use that as a clinic. We have a lot to get into, so let's get right into it with our first release strategy. This is your mobility and release section of this video, targeting your erectors, the spinal back muscles, and your quadricep muscles, the muscles in the front of your legs. We're going to be doing a soft tissue release using a foam roller for the back and a 5-inch foam ball for your quads. Let's get started. First muscle that we're going to target is the quadricep group. We're going to use our foam ball here. We're going to do an active release of the muscle group, specifically the rectus femoris. Now there's 4 quad muscles and they act to extend the knee and flex the hip up. When they're tight and they stretch, if they're too stiff, it pulls the pelvis downward towards the floor, creating posterior pressure back into the lower back as these muscles, again, anchor the pelvis down and pull the spine with it. So we're going to release them with the ball. You're going to place the ball just a cut above the kneecap, right in the middle of the quad. Place some pressure onto it, and Hunter's going to do this by laying on the ground on the ball. He's positioning his body so that the center of mass is right on top of it. The surface of the ball is a little bit broader than like a lacrosse ball or smaller ball, so it won't be so as intense. And you'll notice that he's extending his leg back behind him on his right side, and he's abducting and flexing his leg on the opposite side, the left side, bracing into his left arm. So that's going to position his body so that his spine is nice and neutral, and he's not putting a lot of pressure into his vertebral column. Now he's going to breathe in and begin to bend the knee, and that's going to floss the pressure into the muscle as it slides between the femur and the ball. And then he's going to breathe out and let the leg come down and then relax. By flexing and extending through the knee or articulating the joint, it helps to loosen up the fibers so he can get deeper into the muscle each time, and that's going to allow him to move in and get more length out of the muscle. So he's going to do that for about 30 to 60 seconds at a minimum, upwards of 2 minutes. He's going to breathe in gently and breathe out as he moves through his knee. Then he's going to switch to the other side, and all of this should help to relax the muscles before we stretch them. And that's what we're going to do next, so let's move forward. The purpose of using the foam ball was to help to soften the muscle up and get it to elongate. Now we want to stretch it out and see if we can get more length out of it. So Hunter's going to get into a kneeling position. We're going to start on the right leg down and the left leg forward. First, make sure that your center of mass is right over your hips. Your knee should be directly under your shoulder. Now he's going to start to pull his hips under by engaging his abdominals and flexing through his lumbar spine, the lower portion of his spine. By doing that, it's going to tug the pelvis up, and he's going to start to feel a stretch from his hip bone down to his kneecap. If your knee is uncomfortable and you're doing this on the ground, make sure to double up a mat. Give yourself a nice cushion to keep your knee on. Now as you breathe out, what you're going to do is engage your glute on that same hemisphere. Both of those muscles help to oppose the quad. It'll pull the hip under and it'll stretch through the quad. At the bottom of the breath, you're going to lean forward, bending through your knee, using the opposing hamstring to pull the tailbone under, and that's going to increase the stretch on the opposite hemisphere. Now if you go too far, it's going to be painful, and the muscle is going to guard or fight back. That's actually going to reduce the effect of the stretch. So make sure to only go with the breath and the glute and the opposite knee bend to the point of feeling maybe a little bit of discomfort, but not pain. Now if you'll notice, Hunter's oscillating in and out of that position, so he's breathing out and sinking into it and relaxing it. And as he relaxes it, he's pushing his foot down into the table a little bit to actually flex the quad. The act of flexing it and stretching it helps to teach the nervous system to cooperate with each other, and it's going to help to elongate the muscle and give you a deeper stretch. Remember, you're going to do this for about 30 to 60 seconds, upwards of 2 minutes, and then switch to the other side. And then we're going to get into our next release, which is going to be in the erectors. You're going to need your foam roller. The erectors are the muscles along the backside of the spine that help to pull your back up into full extension. Now, oftentimes these muscles are overused because our quads are tight, like we talked about, pulls the pelvis down. And when the pelvis comes down, it makes it very hard for you to go into full hip extension. Problem is, in order to fully straighten our knee, our hips have to come forward into extension. So if they're forced downward, it's going to create a lot of pressure down in the knee. Knee issues develop from that, lower back issues develop from that. So either way, we want to, again, reduce the effort that the quads and the lower back exert on the pelvis, and by extension, help the extremities like the legs and the upper body. So today what we're going to do is use this foam roller to help to elongate these muscles along the back side of the back. This feels awesome. It's a great technique. It's a way of elongating these muscles that allow you to go more into spinal flexion. That's going to help you to get a stronger contraction out of your flexors, not your extensors, but your flexors, like your abdominals, obliques, transverse, and rectus abdominis. So Hunter's on his back. He's placed the roller just up on top of his pelvis, and he's rolling up the length of the spine until he finds a tender spot. Now we're going to do some general release of this muscle group. So he's applying weight, he's lifted his pelvis off the ground, and he's pulling his hips under, so he's engaging his core. Now what he's going to do is start to soften his core and relax his hips so they tip down anteriorly, and then he's going to roll them up and under, and that's going to flex the spine. So every time he pulls under, he should feel a natural elongation of the muscles as they glide under the pressure of that roller, and as he goes before and after flexion extension. So he's going to breathe out as he flexes under, and breathes in as he releases it. And every time he breathes out, he's going to see if he can get a little bit of a deeper tuck and get a little bit more into flexion, and then soften it as he extends. Make sure to keep your back in a neutral position, meaning you're not going to hyperextend on the roller. And as the muscle starts to comply and relax a little bit, you can start going up the length of the spine, looking for new areas, and maybe only approach just the scapula right underneath the shoulder blade. So when you're doing this, you can hit both sides of the spine. If you twist a little bit to each side, take about a minute on either side, take some quality time to help to open these up, and then we're going to stretch it out, going down into a child's pose, a yoga position. So finish up and let's get into it. So he just released the muscles along the sides of his spine, the erectors. Now we want to lengthen them, and he's going to do that by getting into a child's pose. So he's going to face down in a kneeling position, and he's going to start to bring his body weight down towards the floor. Now, if you guys have tight quads or hip flexors like we just talked about, this might be difficult for you to do without any pain around the inguinal or the hip line or down at the knee. So you may want to reduce the range of motion. And Hunter, show him what that looks like. You would come up a little bit. You're not going to sit down so far on your hips. So there should be no pain up in the hip sockets, up in the front, or again along the length of the back. Just make sure that you keep an eye on that. So if you have the available range of motion, you're going to sit your hips back towards your heels, and you'll notice that Hunter has got his head tucked. He's put his brim back behind him so he can tuck his chin down, and he can bring his head closer to the floor. By doing that, it's going to elongate through the entire length of his spine, from his pelvis all the way up to the base of his skull, and the muscles actually cascade along the entire length. So what he's going to do is he's going to breathe in deeply. As he does, he's going to get expansion through the thoracic. The rib cage are going to expand open. It's going to stretch the muscles in the thoracic portion. He's going to breathe out. As he does, he's going to actively engage his abdominals, and then that's going to stretch through the lumbar portion. So the act of breathing in expands the thoracic, intrathoracic pressure. The act of breathing out, intra-abdominal pressure, stretching the erectors on the lumbar spine. As he does that, he's going to start to notice that as he breathes out, he can sit his hips back further and further. If you are feeling a little pinching in the front of the hips, put weight into your palms and ease your weight back through your shoulders as you sit back towards your hips. And that should help to alleviate some of the pressure from the flexor dominance you may be experiencing. Again, you're going to shoot for about 30 to 60 seconds at a minimum, upwards of 2 minutes. Do that for a solid 2. So let's get into it. This is a direct activation of the transverse abdominis using a supine dead bug position. This is the deepest layer of our abdominal wall that basically serves as a corset to maintain the functional stability of our pelvis and our lower spine. Oftentimes this is an underused or developed muscle group, so we don't know how to get truly into it. So today we're going to show you how to engage this muscle, help to turn it up so that it provides the stability necessary to be functional through the hips. So in order to do that, we're going to get into a dead bug position. That means you're going to be laying on your back. It's called a supine position. You're going to bring your legs up. Now again, if you have the mobility available to you, keep your knees extended so we can stretch a little bit through the hamstrings. And then your arms are going to come up off the table vertically and horizontally adducted right over the chest. So what the goal would be is to bring one leg down into extension while the opposite arm on the opposite hemisphere of the body goes down into flexion. And then draw the weight of both appendages back up. Now, real quick, what we want to make sure that we're avoiding here is the stiffness or relative stiffness of the muscles on the front of the hips. If they're too great, this is going to pull the pelvis down. It's going to arch your lower back into extension and your pelvis may rotate open. Okay, if you see that, it means that your abdominal pressure is not sufficient enough to support the pelvic alignment, and the muscles and the stiffness of the muscles attaching the leg to the pelvis actually overwhelm the core musculature and start to deviate and create distortion in the lower back. And again, that's what we're trying to avoid and why we reduce the quads and the erectors today. So as you get into position, go ahead and get your legs up. Make sure that your right and left hip bones are even to each other, that the lower back doesn't come off the mat. You're going to breathe out as you come down. The act of breathing out actively will engage your abs. You're going to get all the air out of the bottom of the lung, and then breathe in deeply and bring your arms and legs as high as you can, once again without seeing any deviation in the length relationship on both hemispheres. So you're going to breathe out for 4, let the opposing arm and leg come down, breathe in, cinch them back together, and then alternate to the other side. All said and done, you're looking at about 20 repetitions. You notice he's going down to a 4-second down, creating a little pause at the bottom, holding his breath with the pressure already engaged in the abs, and then breathe it in and bring it all together. Good job. So the more that you can breathe out and the more that you can breathe in, the stronger your core is going to be, the more engagement or facilitation of the transverse abdominis you will get. And remember, this muscle should be relatively stiff all the time to support the length and the positioning of the ribs and the hips, so that your shoulders, arms, and legs all move as they're intended to with the right anchor system. So very important that we get this muscle fatigued, get it stronger, get it stiffer. We're going to do it 2 sets and then move into the next exercise. Let's go. This is our integration segment of the video where we're going to be doing an anterior oblique sling system movement using an exercise band. The sling system that we're going to incorporate as part of our integration segment is called the anterior oblique sling. And just like the name indicates, oblique means across the body from one side or one hemisphere to the other. And this is an important grouping of muscles that helps to stabilize our pelvis as we go through basic functional movements like gait or walking. So as I step forward, the muscle that helps to support my femur on the inside is called your adductor complex, or your groin muscles. They attach the leg to the pelvis. From the pelvis up to the ribs, we have our internal oblique on the one hemisphere and the lead leg, and we have our external obliques on the opposite. So these muscles collectively contract to help to maintain the level or the positioning of our pelvis. Oftentimes one of those segments can be stronger than another, and by extension can create hypermobility in other areas. So today we want to show you how to integrate all of these muscles to fire collectively in the right sequence to maintain the right symmetry and joint positioning as you go into a basic lunge. It seems pretty elementary, but it's actually pretty complicated, so we want to give you the cueing mechanisms, make sure you do it right every single time. So Hunter's going to do that by grabbing a band. He's going to support it in his right hand. And again, we're going to be working from the right upper quarter to his lower body across the body. So he's going to step into his left leg, and then he's going to push his body through, or his chest through, into flexion. The act of rotating through the trunk like this is going to engage his external oblique. When he drops down into the hip, his hip's going to want to drop down anteriorly, and that's going to create a reflex stretch action of his internal oblique and get that to fire. Now his groin is helping to support his leg internally against the pressure of his glute on the backside of his hip. All said and done, he's holding the position and keeping his upright posture so that his torso is right up over his hips. His knee is directly in line with his toe, and it's not driving inward, adducting medially more than about 10 degrees from the joint center at the hip, which would be called the acetabulum. So from there, he's going to push off the heel, come back up, and make sure that the band tension doesn't sling him back and outsweep his thoracic back towards the wall. He's going to breathe in as he sinks and breathes out, contracting the obliques as he comes up to help to decelerate that spiral back so his hips don't move all around. What we're going to watch for is his hip line. You'll notice at the bottom of the lunge, his right and left hip bones are both fairly equal to each other. They're not excessively rotated, and one is not dropping more towards the floor. So they're even to each other. They're not dropping excessively or creating a hike in one hemisphere over the other. You're going to do that for about 20 repetitions. One more time, you want to make sure that the symmetries and the angles of these joint positions are equal. If you notice you don't have the mobility for it, then don't go the full range of motion. Or if you start to see deviations like excessive knee internal rotation or too much outsweep of the opposite hip, or the trunk goes too far in, the shoulder starts to shrug, or the neck starts to kick up into extension, like so. These are all compensation patterns from motor dominances that you're going to want to reduce. So stop, even if that means you don't do all 20 repetitions. You want to make sure every single repetition is done with intention and is precise. So once you're done with one set, give yourself about a minute, about 60 seconds to recover, and then do a whole nother set of 20, and then that would be it for integration. We're going to finish with our strength segment of the video, where we're going to be targeting our internal oblique, doing a side bending crunch position using a dumbbell. We're going to attack your internal oblique for the last one. A lot of people ask, why do we put the strength at the end and not the integration? We want to make sure that we don't fatigue your body too heavily in one segment before we ask the whole collection to actually do the job together. So we wouldn't want to overload the oblique before we would go into that anterior oblique sling system. So today what you want to remember is that the oblique is one of the abdominal muscles that creates spinal flexion. It also creates a lateral flexion of the spine as well. But generally speaking, if our hips and our quads are dominant, it pulls our pelvis downward, and it actually elongates these muscles, and they start to become lax or less stiff. So basically, we want to isolate them with a strength movement to actually increase their sarcomeres, or actually the muscle fiber density themselves. And when we do that, it's actually going to make the muscle stiffer and hold the position of the pelvis without having to think about it. So ultimately, we're changing the biomechanics of the joint positioning without having to fully engage or cognitively try to. If you're doing that, then it's most likely not going to happen, because our posture is hard to sustain in everyday activities. So with that in mind, we're going to lay down on this Bosu. If you don't have a Bosu at home, you can grab a couple pillows. You're going to brace this underneath your trunk, so between your pelvis and your rib cage. You're going to notice that Hunter is laying on his right side and his left side is up. He's got his left leg slightly forward. This would actually start to resemble the gait pattern. His right leg would be back behind him using his glute. His right or left leg would be up in front of him. And in fact, he would be using his oblique and QL to help to stabilize his pelvis while he was taking a step forward with the left leg forward. So it resembles, again, a functional movement, even though he's in isolation horizontally. So now he's going to bring his weight up off the ground. He's taking the shoulder back behind him so that the arm is parallel to his scapula, and the scapula is laying flat on the rib cage. He's supporting his neck with his hand, and he's keeping his right shoulder drawn back. So the alignment of his spine should be parallel, meaning that the upper portion, where his TL or thoracic and lumbar meet, are basically in line with his pelvis, right in line with his trochanter, and he's keeping his head back in line with his rib cage. So he's got a nice straight neutral back. He's not letting his back hyperextend or flex as he comes up. That way he's going to protect his spine and fully engage the QL and the oblique on that hemisphere. Now as he comes up, he's breathing in, and then he's going to breathe out against gravity and slowly decelerate. Remember, the act of breathing out helps to contract the muscles of the abdominals. So he's contracting the abs, slowly letting the weight come down and working against gravity. He's doing that for a 4 count down, 2 count at the bottom. He's slowly resting, but not just resting on his bones, actually still maintaining the pressure. If you were to palpate, you could feel that his oblique is still engaged at the bottom, and then he's going to breathe in and lift up with gravity. So all said and done, you're going to do about 15 to 20 repetitions with that time under tension, 4 down, 2 at the bottom, 1 come up. If you do that for 20 reps, it's about 2 minutes and some change. It's going to be pretty intense. You're going to start feeling it towards the end of that 2 minutes. If you start to deviate, start to hyperextend or flex, you start seeing your shoulders start to shrug or your neck starts to kick up into extension, stop. Again, all compensations. Make sure you fatigue the muscle and nothing else. Give yourself a minute in between to recover, and then do it again. And that should sufficiently target that oblique, and then you can do the other side. Now in future videos, you're going to notice that we talk about obliquity and one hip over the other and how one muscle might be overworked over the other. Today we're working on bilateral relationships. So today we're talking about the general distortion associated with lower cross. We'll get into the more specific stuff down the road when we get into our other episodes, Design to Move. That brings us to the end of this segment and the end of our video. Thank you all for joining us today for another episode of Design to Move. Remember, today we targeted a common movement distortion pattern that impacts our full body movement, and it's called lower cross imbalance. This is a typical issue in our posture where our quadriceps and hip flexor muscles are too tight, and by extension it pulls our pelvises downward, compressing our back and flexing the muscles of the lower back called the extensor group. This can impact our posture, our rib cage positioning, the way our legs track, a whole slew of different movement imbalances that stem from this. So today, by applying these techniques, it's going to help to restore the natural alignment and function of your lumbar-pelvic system, your lumbar spine, and it should help to reduce some of the other symptoms maybe associated with other movement distortions in the body. Once again, if you have questions on the topic, you can reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. Make sure to read the blog on the topic and continue to apply the practice until you see a noticeable change to your pelvis and you can start to restore your function and posture. As we always say, your body's designed to move, so stay in motion, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Design to Move.